Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a really fascinating look at the absolute biggest food company on the planet, Nestle. We're going to unpack the incredibly complex realities behind the brands that are probably sitting right there in your kitchen. And to do this, we're relying entirely on documented sources to map out exactly how this massive global entity operates. Okay, let's dive into this. The central tension we're exploring today is a profound one. See, in advertisements, in the supermarket aisle, and on official corporate websites, we see a company presenting a pristine public relations image, one that's hyper-focused on health, sustainability, and community. But when we step back and look at their historical record across the globe, we find this massive ledger of controversies. So how do these two completely different realities coexist? Let's find out. Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. First, the Nestle paradox. Then, the business of bottled water. Third, ethics in the supply chain. Fourth, food safety and health. And finally, the consumer's choice. We're going to map these topics out side by side using just the facts.
Section 1, the Nestle paradox. Section 2, the business of bottled water.
And this brilliantly illustrates our first major theme. If you read Nestle's official FAQ, they paint themselves as custodians of the land. They emphasize that their spring water comes from protected underground sources, it's free from chemical treatment, and they actively encourage biodiversity, right? But contrast that with the critics' view, which really gained major traction at the 2000 World Water Forum. Critics argue that the company is effectively taking control of natural aquifers, draining regions that are already drought-stricken, and turning what really should be a fundamental human right into a corporate commodity. To understand just how effectively they extract this water, we have to look at the micro-level engineering. They use this highly impressive zero liquid discharge, or ZLD technology, at their plants. Normally, standard water filters get clogged up by natural minerals like silica, but Nestle uses advanced VSEP technology that literally vibrates the system to prevent this buildup. It acts like a crystallizer. Think of it like aggressively shaking a sieve so it never ever clogs, which allows them to recover water way beyond normal limits. It's high-level science used to maximize extraction. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the cost. Despite all that advanced, high-volume extraction, the yearly fee Nestle pays the U.S. Forest Service to pump and bottle about 30 million gallons of water from the San Bernardino National Forest in California is just $524. Yeah, you heard that right. And according to the sources, this pumping continued even during severe droughts, operating on a permit that had actually expired way back in 1988. That obviously raised massive questions from local citizen groups and environmentalists about corporate utility versus local water restrictions. To understand how this operates from the corporate perspective, we can look back to 1994. Former CEO Helmut Mouncher compared natural springs to petroleum. He said, "You can always build a chocolate factory, but springs you have or you don't have." It anchors this view of water as a highly valuable, extractable commodity. And this wasn't just an isolated thought either. It was echoed years later by his successor, Peter Brebeck-Letmathe, who famously criticized the idea that water should be a human right, though he did walk those statements back amid public backlash. Section 3, ethics in the supply chain. Let's shift gears from water extraction to global supply chains. When we buy a chocolate bar, we rarely think about the source. But according to a 2016 study published in Fortune magazine, approximately 2.1 million children were still doing the incredibly dangerous, physically taxing work of harvesting cocoa in West African countries like the Ivory Coast and Ghana. In these regions, the farmers supplying major chocolate companies, including Nestle, were making mere cents a day, which is well below the extreme poverty line. Let's move to and see how this builds. In 2001, the industry actually committed to eradicating child labor within 4 years. But by 2005, that initial Harkin-Engel Protocol deadline was totally missed. Then, revised deadlines in 2008 and 2010 also missed. Multiple lawsuits were even filed under the Alien Tort Claims Act, alleging children were trafficked and forced into slavery on these plantations. And by 2019, Nestle flat out admitted they could not guarantee their chocolate products were free from child slave labor because they could only trace 49% of their purchasing back to the actual farm level. It's also important to note that these supply chain issues extend way beyond cocoa. Back in November 2015, at the end of a self-imposed investigation, Nestle actually self-disclosed that seafood products sourced in Thailand for its Purina cat food were produced using forced labor. Honestly, this disclosure genuinely surprised the industry, because massive international companies rarely acknowledge these kinds of abuses voluntarily. In response to their findings, they promised a 2016 program to train boat captains on human rights and to hire external auditors to check for compliance.
Section 4, Food Safety and Health.
Now let's look at the end products that make it into our pantries. These product safety controversies span the entire globe and cover vastly different consumer goods. We're looking at a U.S. E. coli outbreak in refrigerated cookie dough, a massive melamine contamination scandal in Chinese-made milk, and unsafe lead levels that temporarily banned Maggi noodles in India. This even extends to fatal incidents, like a 2022 E. coli outbreak linked to Buitoni pizza in France, and a massive 2026 global recall spanning over 60 countries after baby food was linked to cerealide contamination from Chinese-supplied RAA oil. And regarding those baby products, the historical controversies run incredibly deep. Starting in the 1970s, Nestle faced severe criticism for aggressively marketing baby formula in developing countries. Critics allege that salespeople, sometimes literally dressed as nurses, distributed free samples in maternity units and discouraged mothers from breastfeeding by claiming the formula was healthier. This sparked a massive, global boycott originating in the U.S. in 1977. It was suspended in 1984 when Nestle agreed to follow WHO guidelines, but then it was relaunched in 1989 over allegations of repeated marketing practices in places like Pakistan. So the crucial point is how these historical practices echo right into the present day. Just recently, a 2024 investigation by the Swiss NGO Public Eye revealed that Nestle's popular baby cereals and formulas sold in lower and middle-income countries still contained significantly higher amounts of added sugar compared to the exact same products sold in Europe and other developed nations.
Section 5, The Consumer's Choice.
How do consumer-facing pledges stack up against operational realities? Well, corporate PR campaigns often claim their bottled water is an eco-friendly choice, and that most bottles avoid landfill sites. But environmental groups have strongly rebuked these claims as greenwashing, pointing out that Nestle's own corporate citizenship report admitted most bottles weren't actually recycled. Similarly, despite public pledges to protect forests, a 2017 NGO report revealed that the cocoa industry's demand drove severe deforestation, converting 90% of some protected national parks in the Ivory Coast into cocoa plantations, which absolutely devastated local elephant and chimpanzee populations. We see this friction in animal welfare too. Nestle signed the 2018 Better Chicken commitment to improve welfare practices, but if we look at the actual data, their cage-free egg sourcing slightly declined, dropping from 76.3% in 2021 down to 74.4% by 2024. This neutrally highlights the very real gap that often exists between ambitious corporate pledges and the day-to-day execution of a sprawling global supply chain. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative question. How do we weigh the undeniable utility and convenience of the products from this massive corporation against these heavily documented global realities? The next time you walk down the grocery aisle and see these familiar brands, what facts will inform your choice? Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope this deep dive has sparked a desire in you to look a little closer at the supply chains that shape our world. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.